So in this video, I'm going to leverage the information here on javascript.info. A lot of good stuff in here and kind of parse it down a little bit, read through it. We'll run a few examples. And in the process, we'll learn about objects and arrays in JavaScript. So let's get into it right now. So from previous chapters and previous exposure, we know that there are 8 total data types in JavaScript. There's 7 primitives, really only 5 that we deal with, especially at the beginner status. String, number, Boolean, those are the 3 critical ones. Then we have those 2 kind of weird ones, null and undefined. And then we have big int and symbols, which we don't really mess with. And then finally, we have objects. So everything in JavaScript is an object except primitives. Now, a primitive represents a discrete data type, a single data point, or as it says here, simpler, a single thing, a string, number, whatever it is. An object, everything else in JavaScript, everything built into the language, including things like arrays and even functions, they are all special built-in types of objects. They're based upon something called an object prototype, which we won't get too deep into that here. That's more about the OOP or object-oriented programming aspect of JavaScript. It's prototypal based. But here we'll focus on practical things like just using the objects and arrays for things that beginners might want to be introduced to for day-to-day tasks. All right, so objects are used to store keyed collections of various data and more complex entities. Put simply, later on they'll talk about something like a file cabinet, but it's like a grocery bag. You know, I can have a can of green beans on the shelf, and that's the primitive, green beans as a string, if you want to visualize it like that. And once I take that can of green beans and put it into a grocery bag, we can think of the grocery bag as a collection type or a composite type or an object. So to create an object in JavaScript, you really just throw up some braces. So if I go in here to VS Code, generate, that's an object right there. You know, so it's an empty object. It doesn't have anything in it, but it is an object. I could then go in here and say const groceries equals, and now I've created an empty object and assigned it to a variable groceries. Here's a little thing to keep in mind. The keyword const, which is typically what we'll use to declare variables if you're following most standard style guides. You could use let, but a lot of the modern style guides favor using const over let. Now, if you use const, you might think const is constant. It's not. It just means constant assignment. So what do I mean by that? I mean that I have this empty object that I just created here, but there's nothing that's stopping me from saying something like this. Actually, let me make this a little bit simpler. I'll just say grocery, and this single object will represent a grocery item. And then I'm going to say, yeah, something like this will work. And so, well, now it's getting a little bit too fancy, but this is completely legal. I can take this grocery, even though it's been declared with the keyword const, and I can do what we call mutate it in place. I can take my empty grocery bag and I can throw in an item that has a name, price, quantity, whatever. I am creating these keys. These are names that I pick out, whatever names for the keys that I would like. And then these are the values. That can be a string, it can be a number. In this case, that's what we're using. So we were to run this code. Let me make this bigger here. Clear the screen. If I just run this code, here's my object that I just created. No errors or anything. So what exactly does const mean? What do you mean const means constant assignment? It means that I cannot go like this. You know, I can't just create, there we go. Actually, Copilot is just going to tell us this will throw an error because grocery is a constant. So again, remember that const means constant assignment. When you're talking about primitives, then if I say something like this is a primitive value assigned to the name. This will never, ever It's a const. It's assigned as the string mark, and primitives are immutable. They can never ever change. You can throw it out and reassign it, but you'd have to use a let. Okay, that's what we mean by const means constant assignment. I can mutate an object, but I can't do anything if it's a primitive with const. Const means constant assignment. Okay, getting back into what they're focused on here. So they talk about having these names and let's like in a cabinet with signed files. I guess you could think of it like that. I mean, I think a grocery sack is maybe a little bit easier to go with, but there's a couple ways to create objects for all intents and purposes. This is how we do it. And here they're using let quite a bit. Uh, as I've mentioned, most modern style guides will recommend going with const over let, but again, that can vary from team to team. This is the long way because since JavaScript is inherently object oriented, but it's based upon prototypes, we use this special constructor function with a capital O. And this constructor function uses the object prototype to return an instance of an object. But we don't really care about all that. If you want to create an empty object, just do it like we just talked about. So usually the figure brackets, I mean, I would call them like curly braces or something, but whatever. And it's an object literal because everything in JavaScript is an object. What we're doing here is creating our own instance of an object. So that's more correctly known as an object literal, but we'll usually just say it's an object. But technically speaking, an object is something that's built into the language that's already given to us, and an object literal is one that we created using those braces like it just showed. So right here, you can put some stuff in here, or you can start empty and add it later like we saw in our other example. The point is you have key, colon, value separated by commas. As the name, the value, the resulting user object can be imagined as a cabinet with two signed files. You can add, or in other words, you can mutate. You can mutate it. Okay, so in this file cabinet analogy, the file cabinet's there in your office. You can't just go and throw the file cabinet out and reassign another file cabinet, but you are allowed to open the file cabinet and mutate what's in there. You can do, yes, Boolean, whatever it is. Now here you can use this keyword delete, especially if you're prepping for React and most modern functional approaches, libraries, and frameworks dealing with UI and stuff. You really want to think twice about using something like the keyword delete or really mutating things at all. Generally speaking, until you get deeper into it and understand the consequences, a good rule of thumb is to try to avoid mutations. Just keep that in the back of your mind at least. And yeah, you can do stuff like this, but don't. Like here, if this is supposed to be a Boolean, I mean, yeah, you could do this. I would just use this as camel case, and I will name it like something like does like birds. You know, if it's a Boolean, things like is, has, does, immediately I see that in the name, and it lets me know, okay, this is going to be a true false things. But yeah, you don't need to do this. That's silliness. Yeah, you can optionally end it with a comma or not. Here in the template repo that we're using in class, if I was to, let's just rework this. I'll take out all this and I'll just put them in there. Yeah, kind of like, okay, now this doesn't, that's not what I wanted. I want to just make it the same as, or similar to what we have. Yeah, like that. So depending on the settings and the style guide, you can add an extra comma or not. Again, most of the time, if you're working on a team, you have a standard set of style guide rules, and it should be, the tooling should be set up like we have in our classroom template repo to take care of those things. All right, so getting back into it. Yeah, again, just don't do this stuff. We're gonna skip over some of this type of stuff, but yeah, we can just keep going. Like I said, I'll focus on things that are the most practical here. And here I tend to use like console log or console info. If you're in the browser, you can do things like prompt or alert. We're working in a node environment, so we don't have those like pop-up windows or anything like in the browser. So they're kind of just going on and on. This is good to know here. This is good to know. So if I say grocery dot stop, and I run this code, it's not going to be an error. It's not going to be an error. It's just going to say undefined. So you're saying to JavaScript, go into this object called grocery using the dot notation, look for a key called stuff, and JavaScript's going to do that. Because it's not like in a compile, it's not like TypeScript or a compile language. You just interprets whatever you type on the fly when you run your code. And so it's going to go ahead and do that. It's not going to tell you, oh, there's nothing called stuff in there. So it's going to go in here, and when you look for that, it's going to say that it's undefined. That's it. So let's we can leave it at that. If the key doesn't exist, it's undefined. Let's see, computed properties. Can use square brackets because this is kind of upping the difficulty a little bit. But yeah, let's remix this example right here. Um, let's say basically what they're doing is they're creating a string and then they're dynamically putting it in there. All right. So let's see if we can recreate that a little bit. This would be like, okay, one thing we can do is something like this, where I do it like that. But really what they're showing is something that's a little bit more advanced with dynamic keys. And what we could do, let's see, let's get rid of this stuff here. I was kind of throwing me off here because I wouldn't expect this to come up so quickly in terms of computed process properties or dynamic keys. So I guess you can say, I don't know, property name. There we go. And then what you could do like this, right? So what this is doing, and quite frankly, I'm just going to show this quickly. If you're just starting to learn about objects and you think this is weird, it is weird. This was a sudden jump in the content. Like this is something that is important to know, but not on day one of learning objects. So there you go. If you have a variable out here and you want to use that as the key, you can do it using this bracket syntax. So if we take a look at our grocery object now, nothing special happens. It's still going to look basically the same right there. See how it says name? And if I switch this to what or something, whatever, and run it again, then that property is going to be name whatever. So this is the computed property or dynamic property name. Again, not something you should really worry about right now. So we'll keep going here. I mean, this is some craziness here. I'm just going to skip this because it's just not really that practical and nothing you need to know right now. So the first part was pretty good. That second part, yeah, not a fan. Property value shorthand, that's pretty decent. So this is assuming you've seen how to write functions before. So it says you often use existing variables as values for property names. So what it's going to get at is instead of saying name colon name, you can just shorthand it like this. And in fact, our classroom linter is set up like that. So let me go back to, if I just say name here, and I'll take this out and just use the literal key. So I'm not using this up here. I'm going to say Apple. In fact, here, just to make it just to make it more confusing. No, just to make it less confusing. Let's just do it like this. Okay, so we have this variable fruit, and whatever the value that's assigned to fruit is, I want it in here as the name. All right. So what we can do now, this is because we know that part. We can take a variable and pop it in here, but in the event that the key, so if I come in here and say name, see expected property shorthand. So this is the long way of saying, look, I want to create a key that's called name, and for the value, I want to reference this variable out here called name. And so what we can just do if I hit Command S on our classroom template repo, it's just going to say name. And don't worry about why there's a strike through to it. It's this weird TypeScript thing. But that's what this is equivalent to. Okay. So, I mean, if we wanted to not have, we could just say fruit and then say fruit here, right? And so check this out. Now the name of the property is fruit, and then the value is whatever string is assigned to fruit. And the result of all that is like this. You have fruit apple because the name of the property is fruit and the value that we're assigning to it is apple. That's what they're showing you. This is good stuff here. That bracket stuff was silliness. This is pretty good to know. There you go. Same as name colon name. So yeah, you can't use like weird. I mean, you wouldn't do this anyway. So this is pretty fake. We're just gonna skip past all this. We don't care about this underscore proto business, so it's not that great. So we already saw that we can, if it's undefined, it's not in there. So just to reiterate, no such property. This is going to say undefined. If you want to check, you can do this, but what you can do is say, um, and it's going to come out to be false. You can use this in keyword to go into an object and just learn up front if it's in there. But you don't really need to do that. We'll see why probably a little bit later. And if I say is the key fruit in grocery, that's true because it's right there. Okay, so we can keep going. Yeah, it's just showing that, well, you better use quotes to do that literally, or if it doesn't have quotes, then it needs to be a variable name. Okay. So it's undefined. The property does exist. Okay, so in here, they're showing some, additional details on this that may or may not be that uh, important. Like, why would you do this? Like, you're just going to create a value called undefined. If anything, this is why you don't explicitly use the value undefined. If you want to do something like that, just make it null. That way, when you see null, then you know, oh, that's something we deliberately did. And if we see undefined, that means it's not in there. That's it. Oh, here you go. It says that here. Like we mostly use null. So yeah, this is just it's kind of information overload if you're just coming into objects. So there's a little thing in here called the for in loop. I'm really not going to go over this. You can kind of look over it. It's not something we would actually normally do something with called like object dot keys or object dot values and things. For in is actually not. We don't usually worry too much about performance because it doesn't really matter until you're building mega apps. But it is a little bit of a performance hit actually to use for in. In fact, like there's a famous style guide from Airbnb that specifically tells you that they don't like to use for in. So I don't really use for in. You can take it or leave it. That's fine. Are objects numbered? Um, can we rely on this? Yeah, but it's in a special fashion, right? So like don't rely on it. That's it. We're gonna skip this section. Don't rely on consistent ordering of keys. And realistically, like that's where you want to use more like an array and control the sorting. So just don't rely on it. So you can take it or leave it what the stuff says here. Inner properties, what's that? Okay, I mean this is all kind of beyond the scope here. So here, let's see what else. I mean, there really is just kind of going off on a tangent here now. User, yeah, we can add. We already know we can add properties because that's how we did it the first time. So to fix the issue with phone codes, yeah, this is just some kind of off the wall stuff. We're just gonna skip over this. Yeah, this lesson could have been like half the length. So we're just gonna move on. We're just gonna move on to arrays. It's a little bit of information overload. All right. So arrays are a special type of object. Again, everything in JavaScript is an object except primitives. So we saw like we have a function constructor in the new keyword. Well, everything array has its own function constructor with the new keyword. That's not how we do it in real life, but that array function constructor is based upon the object prototype. And so that's what we mean when we say JavaScript OOP has prototypal inheritance. But Quite frankly, here in 2025, especially if you're prepping for things like React, you don't really need to know that. Okay, ordered collection. I mean, right there, we just said that, okay, if you want order, you want to rely on arrays a little bit more. So before we even get into, actually, we can get into it. It's right here. Same thing, new array. Now you just use brackets. So going back here, going back to our little example code, I'll leave all this in here. And what I'll do is I'll make groceries. So I can create an array just like this. And notice the naming here. This is why I didn't use groceries for an object. An object is usually describing one thing, properties and values of one thing. Even though it's a collection, it's typically used for a collection of key value pairs that are associated with one thing, like an item in a shopping cart, for instance. Pretty much like we have here. Whereas if you really want multiple different things, you want to go with plural variable name, groceries, and that tells us right off the bat this is going to be an array before we even see it. So now I can manually add. I can go in here and say, yeah, I could do groceries dot push, but I can do groceries bracket 0 equals, no, I don't want put. I mean, yeah, you can also add it by pushing it into it, but that's not what I was going for. And now if we log groceries, it's pretty similar. Oops, not groceries dot 0. Gosh, confused me with the push. See, it's pretty much the same thing, but now we've taken our grocery object and put it inside of a grocery bag, if you will. It's going to be part of a bunch of groceries. So this is a very common structure that we'll deal with in real life, an array of objects, almost anything you think of. Again, going back to a shopping cart, you have a list or an array of products. So it's going to be an array of products very similar to this with like a name, price, whatever it is, coupon codes, different things like that. Or you have a list of users. So almost anything you can think of, a list of students in a classroom database that you pull into your JavaScript program. It's going to each student's going to have be an object inside of a larger array. So arrays of objects extremely common. All right, hopefully this doesn't get too crazy. They're starting off simple. We can just throw in, whatever we want into an array. So this is kind of the difference. It's still a collection type, but with objects, you are custom naming the keys. In arrays, they're getting automatically assigned, and they're just going to start at 0. So 0 is the first item and go up from there, 0, 1, 2. So objects, you make up the key names. Arrays, they're automatically assigned. They start at 0. And same thing, you can mutate it. Even if you do const, you can mutate it. There's a good thing to know about the length property. So remember that an array is a built-in object. Therefore, the JavaScript array prototype gives it certain properties. One of those properties is length. That's why you see this dot notation, right? Fruits is just another type of object, and we can use dot notation on it. So this length is the built-in property, and as you can guess, it tells us the number of items in there, 3. So yeah, I mean alert, but we're using console log. Okay, you can do this. Yeah, you can do this, but we don't. Like this is where we're getting into like the fake fringe stuff. So just take it or leave it. Trailing comma, okay. Yeah, you can get the last item in an array. So typically, how would you get the last item of an array? You would say, okay, I want access to the plum. So if I know that there's 3 things, I can say fruits bracket 0, 1, 2. I want the index 2 to get that item. Going here, I'll just copy their thing, pop it in here, and then I'll say fruits bracket 2. Okay, so we'll run that and we're going to see plum. Okay, and with our linting rules, it'll change it to const. But fruits bracket 2. If I go to fruits bracket 20, that's going to be undefined. Same type of thing. You're going into fruits and you're using the numerical key, but you're accessing something that's not in there. It doesn't mean you get some weird error or anything. It's just undefined. Okay, so index 0, index 1, index 2. All right, so with that, let's see what else are they talking about in here. Oh yeah, how do you get the last item? Well, if I know what the index is of the last item, then that's easy. But let's say there was a bunch in here, and I'm not going to sit there and count it out. So I could do this. I could say fruits dot length minus 1. You get it? Because there's 3 items and the last one is at 2. Likewise, if there's 10 items, the last one is index 9. 100 items, the last one is at index 99. So you just take the length of the array and subtract 1. Or the newer way to do it is actually even simpler. You just put a negative index in here. So you say at like this and take that out. This is actually pretty cool. And what this is saying is instead of going fruits bracket 1, which would be 0, 1, you're saying start at the end and just count 1 in. And it's a little bit confusing because if you're doing the at, then you're starting at minus 1. You're not saying like at 0 or something. So it's a little bit weird. You may be better off just doing the length minus 1 because that's a little bit more explicit, but this is the shorthand of say, hey, go to the end and come in like 1 slot over. A bit cumbersome, yeah, so that's what they show here, same as. Exactly the same as array bracket 0. For negative, it steps back. That's a good explanation. I like that. So we'll quickly talk about these methods here, but again, in the interest, if you're preparing for things like React and modern functional programming, because there's a lot you can do with JavaScript, but that's what we focus on in our class is prepping for React. We don't really do any of this stuff because a lot of this stuff mutates our object. In this case, mutates our array, so it won't really do it. So we'll take a quick look at this stuff. So shifting and pushing, push adds an element to the end, pop takes an element from the end. So, and they talk about this first in, first out, last in, first out. So it really depends on, in this class, we try to just take things from a practical standpoint. But if you're, in a much deeper program that's going into computer science and algorithms and stuff, then, this is a little bit more computer science oriented. So we'll kind of gloss over it a little bit. But so we have these fruits, we'll pop, and now we've like taken pear and we've just popped it off the end. So you can think, oh, take it and pop it off of the end. All right, so that you can see it mutates the array. It mutates this array. Push something onto the end of it. Push it to the back of the line, to the end of the line. So at the beginning, this is a weird name. Like pop kind of makes sense. You pop it at the end. But shifting, I guess it's because you're shifting everything over, right? Because apple gets removed, so orange and pear shift over. And then unshift is the same thing, where you're putting something at the beginning, whatever. All right, internals, it's a special kind of object. The square brackets actually come from the object syntax. It's essentially the same. That's interesting. While numbers are the keys. I mean, I would have explained that a little bit earlier, but that's okay. They extend objects, providing special methods such as the length property, but at its core still an object. Yep, I like that they reinforce that. Everything in JavaScript is an object, except for those primitives. So then they go in here and talk about how it's copied by references and things, which is cool. We'll have to get into that kind of separately. Let's see. In short, what they're doing here is they're creating fruits over here. This is an object. Then they're taking this object, in this case banana, and assigning it to the variable ARR, which is a horrible variable name. So it says, yep, these things are the same. So now if you modify ARR by pushing pear onto it, fruits also gets mutated. That's what it means by they're sharing references. With primitives, they're all separate individual values. With objects, you're creating one object, and then if you assign it to a variable and then assign that reference to another variable, it's like two remote controls that control the same TV. So if you change the channel with one by pushing, it's going the TV that's the other controller is looking at. They're both looking at the same TV. I don't know if I mean I guess pushing, yeah, change whatever. Use your own analogy. They're both pointing to the same. It's like two remotes pointing to the same thing. That's what happens right here. You have this thing, and then you're programming the other remote, and they're both pointing at the same. That's what it means by copied by reference. The engine tries to store its elements just as depicted on illustrations, but they all break. Okay, he's probably getting into some weird stuff. So you have a make an array, assign a property with the index. We can add any properties to them. Yeah, this is some weird stuff. I mean, yeah, you could do this, but again, especially in our class, we like to focus on what are we doing 80% of the time, give or take. And obviously, all jobs and projects are different. So we're just going by my experience. But yeah, we're not doing this 80% of the time. You shouldn't go into fruits and just add an arbitrary property to this one particular array. Yeah, you can do that in JavaScript. You can do weird stuff like that. You can create your own sort of version of an array and just add a bunch of random properties on it. But don't do that. I mean, it tells you it's misusing an array. So you don't want to misuse an array. Then they get into things like performance. Yeah, really? Like we're just learning what an array is, and you're going to talk to us about performance. I'm just not sure it's a great use of time. Uh, Not to mention, at least in our class, moving towards React, we're not going to be doing very much of this type of stuff. But again, people get this thing called prematurely obsessed with performance, and it's just not that big of a deal, especially with modern technology, unless you're working on Instagram or something to that scale. And by that time, you'll have learned what you need to learn about these details. So don't stress out about these things on day one. So this is our classic for loop. To for loop over its index. There's a for of, same thing with a for in. I'm going to kind of skip over that. You can look at that if you'd like, but it's not something that some people use it. We're not going to use it in our class. It's actually a bad idea. Yeah, I think that's what they're getting at. I'm going to skim through this, but I think that they're talking about for ins and stuff, not the most performative way to do things. So again, you don't need to worry about performance, but if we don't really do those types of patterns in React and certain libraries and frameworks anyway, it's just I'm trying to whittle down stuff that's more of a priority. The length property automatically updates. It's not actually the count of the values, but the greatest numeric index plus one. Okay, I mean, fine. Again, this is where you're getting into some weird, like, is that really going to be an interview question? Oh, you're not getting the job because you said length is the number of values in the array. I say it's the number of values in the array. Okay, we can split hairs and talk about that. It's not, but whatever. Okay, fine. Okay, why do we care? Like, new array, we just created an array with brackets. So that's what's kind of weird. I like these lessons, but at the same time, it's just this is day one with arrays. You're just throwing out all this stuff that's like fringe and edge stuff. Like nobody does this. Of course, never say nobody, but whatever. Yeah, exactly. We usually use square brackets, so let's just keep it simple and not even mention this other stuff or put this in the notes at the very end. Okay, multi-dimensional arrays, again, not something we need to stress out about on day one of arrays. We're going to skip this. Yeah, every based upon the object prototype, because everything in JavaScript is an object and it's based upon an object prototype, you get this. You can turn any object into some sort of a string representation. I don't like, yeah, and like they're getting into symbol.to primitive. What? Okay, let's just not worry about this. We really don't, with modern linting rules and the way we lint in our class, we don't use the double equals, so we can skip that. Okay, thank you. So there was some good stuff in there, but a lot of silliness too. I hope that helped to distill down what to focus on and what not to worry about. So objects and arrays dealing with um, an array of objects is very, very common in a lot of modern applications. And most of the time when you're dealing with data, again, you can relate that to, any sort of a product catalog. You're almost always dealing with a list or an array, and it's got individual items, but those individual items aren't just strings. They're usually objects that have all their own data in it.